In 1933, a Hungarian explorer was crossing a sandstone plateau in southwestern Egypt, one of the driest and emptiest regions on the entire planet, when he found a cave. Painted on the rock inside it were dozens of human figures. And they were swimming, arms extended, legs bent, bodies angled in the exact posture of someone moving through deep water. Painted there, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest river, in a land where rain does not fall for decades at a time. That was not imagination. That was memory, because the Sahara has not always been the Sahara. Around 10,000 years ago, this desert was green. There were lakes tens of meters deep. There were permanent rivers. There were hippos, crocodiles, giraffes, elephants, cattle herds, and the people who kept them. The largest hot desert on Earth was a humid savanna, and the paintings on the walls of that cave were made by people who saw it every single day. And then the water left, not all at once. Over a few thousand years, a slow wobble in the tilt of the Earth's axis pushed the monsoon rains southward. The lakes shrank. The rivers became beds of stone. The savanna became sand. And everything living here had three options: leave, die, or change. Everything you are about to see is descended from whatever chose the third option. What survived is not a small thing. It is a different thing. It is life stripped to the bone, edited by 9,000 years of heat until only what works was left. There are animals here that never drink water in their entire lives. There are organisms that dry out completely, stop being alive for decades, and start again when they get wet. There is a 3-meter predator trapped in a place where it should not be able to exist at all. And there is one animal that holds the absolute record for heat tolerance in the entire animal kingdom. A creature that comes out of the ground for 10 minutes a day at exactly the moment when the sand is hot enough to cook it, and does that on purpose. Before this video ends, you will understand why. Before we go into the sand, if you are the kind of person who watches wildlife documentaries all the way to the end, this channel was built for you. Subscribe to Doc Wild 4K right now and turn on the bell so you never miss one. And tell us in the comments which country or city you are watching from today. We read every single one. Now let's go. First, you need to understand the scale of this place. The Sahara covers roughly 9,200,000 square kilometers. That is approximately the area of the entire continental United States. It is larger than Australia. It spans 11 countries, from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, and if you began driving on the coast of Morocco heading east, it would take you weeks to reach the other side. And you would spend most of that time seeing nothing that resembles life. But the Sahara is not one thing. The image you have in your head, the towering dunes of golden sand, is only a small fraction of it. Those dune regions are called ergs, and they occupy less than a third of the desert's surface. The rest is something else. Most of the Sahara is reg, gravel plains, flat, gray, scoured by wind until only small hard stones remain, packed tight against each other like paving. It is a landscape without scale. You look at the horizon and you have no way of knowing whether it is 2 kilometers away or 20 because there is nothing vertical to measure it against. Then there are the hamadas, plateaus of bare rock with no sand at all, eroded into steps and escarpments. And in the middle of all of it, rising suddenly out of nothing, there are mountains. The Tibesti Massif in northern Chad reaches over 3,400 meters and contains volcanoes. The Hoggar in Algeria has spires of volcanic rock that look like teeth pushing up out of the ground. The Ennedi, also in Chad, is a labyrinth of arches, towers, and canyons carved from sandstone by a wind that has been working that rock for millions of years. And those mountains change everything, because mountains capture moisture. What little rain falls on the Sahara falls mostly on them and runs down into fissures and canyons where the sun barely reaches. Hold on to that. It matters later. The heat here works in a way that is difficult to convey with numbers, but let's try. Summer air temperature in the Sahara routinely passes 50 degrees Celsius in the shade. The problem is that there is no shade, and air temperature is the least important measurement anyway. What kills is the ground. Sand and rock absorb direct solar radiation all day, and the surface can exceed 80 degrees Celsius. You could cook an egg on it. A cold-blooded animal that stays still on that surface for a few minutes dies, and then comes the part almost nobody expects. At night, with no cloud and no humidity in the air to hold heat in, all of that radiates back out to space within a few hours. The swing between the peak of the day and the small hours before dawn can exceed 40 degrees. In winter, in the central Sahara, night temperatures drop below freezing. There is frost in the largest hot desert in the world. There is snow in the Tibesti and the Hoggar several times a decade. So anything that lives here has to solve two opposite problems within 12 hours. Don't cook during the day, don't freeze at night, and do it with essentially no water. And the first thing you should know is that something is already awake down there, waiting for the sun to go away. The scorpion is the Sahara's dominant predator by number, and the most famous species here is Leiurus quinquestriatus, the death stalker. It is 8 to 11 centimeters long, pale yellow, almost exactly the color of sand, and it carries one of the most potent venoms of any scorpion in the world, a complex cocktail of neurotoxins that attacks the sodium and potassium channels of nerve cells. During the day, it does not exist. It stays buried under stones or inside burrows. It deepens until it reaches cooler, damper sand. At dusk, it comes up, and it hunts by vibration. Sensory hairs on its legs detect the movement of an insect on the sand a few centimeters away, and comb-shaped organs on its underside, called pectines, sweep the ground reading texture and chemical signals. A scorpion can go months without eating. Its metabolism is so economical that it runs on a fraction of the energy an insect of the same size consumes. And here is a strange detail. Under ultraviolet light, a scorpion's exoskeleton glows an intense blue-green. This happens because of compounds in the outer layer of its cuticle. Nobody knows for certain what it is for. There are hypotheses that it uses its own fluorescence to gauge ambient night light and decide whether it is safe to emerge, that it functions as signaling between individuals, that it is simply a chemical byproduct with no function at all. The question is still open. If you walk the Sahara at night with a UV lamp, the ground lights up. Dozens of green points wherever you aim it. They were there the whole time. Speaking of water, or the absence of it, there is something the Sahara does that almost nobody knows about. In northern Chad, there is a basin called the Baudelaire Depression. It is the dry bed of a lake that was once among the largest on the planet, the ancient Lake Mega-Chad. When the water evaporated, what remained was the floor, an enormous layer of fossil sediment made of diatoms, microscopic algae with silica shells that lived and died in that lake over thousands of years. The wind lifts that dust. Every year, the Sahara exports something in the order of 180 million tons of dust across the Atlantic, and a substantial portion of that dust crosses the entire ocean and falls on the Amazon basin. That dust carries phosphorus. The Amazon, for all its abundance, sits on poor soil and loses nutrients constantly to rainfall. The phosphorus resupply that keeps the largest rainforest on Earth functioning comes, in significant proportion, from the floor of a dead lake in the middle of the driest desert on the planet. The desert feeds the forest. Every year. For thousands of years. Now let's look at what the title of this video promised: The Life You Cannot See. Pick up a stone in the Sahara, an ordinary stone, quartz, or limestone, the kind that covers the gravel plains by the million. Turn it over and look underneath. If the stone is translucent enough, you will see a thin layer, greenish or bluish, fused to the underside. That is alive. And it is the most elegant strategy in the entire desert. These are cyanobacteria, photosynthetic organisms among the oldest on the planet, the same lineage that produced the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere billions of years ago. They colonize the underside of translucent stones because doing so solves all of their problems simultaneously. The stone filters ultraviolet radiation that at this intensity would shred their DNA. The stone blocks direct solar heat. The stone condenses what little moisture is in the air before dawn and holds it for a few hours. And it still lets through enough light for photosynthesis to happen. These organisms are called hypoliths, literally under the stone. And they have relatives that went further. The endoliths, which live inside the rock, not underneath, inside. They colonize the microscopic pore spaces between sandstone grains, a few millimeters below the surface, where light still filters through faintly, but the temperature is stable and moisture lasts longer. There are entire microbial communities living inside stones in the Sahara, and from the outside, there is absolutely no sign of it. One genus in particular, crocodiles, is probably the toughest photosynthetic organism science has ever found. It tolerates near-total desiccation, ionizing radiation at doses that would kill almost anything else, extreme temperatures, and absurd salinity. That is why it is one of the most studied organisms in astrobiology. When scientists model what kind of life might exist just below the surface of Mars, this is the kind of thing they think about. And the closest field analog to that scenario here on Earth is the desert you are crossing right now. In areas of more stable soil, these communities form something called biological crust, a surface layer a few millimeters thick made of cyanobacteria, lichens, fungi, and mosses woven together. It looks like dark, slightly wrinkled earth. You would step on it without ever knowing you had. That crust is what holds the desert in place. It cements soil particles together and stops the wind from carrying everything away. It fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere and makes it available to plants, which without it could not establish. It absorbs dew and increases moisture retention in the soil. And it takes decades to form and seconds to destroy. A vehicle tire crossing an area of biological crust erases 50 years of process in a single pass. And directly above those buried communities, something is moving through the sand itself. Buried in the sand is a lizard that does something that looks impossible the first time you see it. Cincus cincus, known as the sandfish, is a lizard about 20 centimeters long with a cylindrical body, extremely smooth polished scales, a wedge-shaped snout, short legs, and reinforced eyelids. When threatened, it dives into the sand and vanishes. It is not digging, it is swimming. Once below the surface, it folds its legs against its body and moves by lateral undulation like a snake or an eel, gliding through loose sand several centimeters down. Its scales have a microstructure that reduces friction against sand grains to a degree that materials engineers study when developing abrasion-resistant surfaces. And it hunts down there. It detects the vibration of a beetle or a larva on the surface through the sand, approaches from underneath without emerging, and strikes from inside the ground. The insect is walking on what appears to be solid, empty ground, and the ground simply opens. And then there are the animals that solve the water problem in a way that borders on the absurd, by simply giving up on being alive for a while. Tardigrades, also called water bears, are microscopic eight-legged animals found in virtually every environment on the planet, including the Sahara. When conditions dry out, the tardigrade does not die. It enters a state called cryptobiosis. It retracts its legs, contracts its body into a compact structure called a ton, expels almost all water from its cells, and replaces part of it with protective sugars and specific proteins that surround its cellular structures and hold them intact. In that state, Its metabolism drops to undetectable levels. It is not sleeping. It is not in a coma. Biochemically speaking, it has stopped, and it can remain that way for years, in some cases for decades. Tardigrades in this state have survived temperatures near absolute zero, pressures greater than the deepest ocean trenches, radiation doses hundreds of times higher than the lethal limit for a human being, and the vacuum of space in experiments conducted in orbit. And when a drop of water lands on it, it rehydrates and walks away within minutes, as if nothing had happened. That is the surface. Now back to what is underneath it. The same trick is used by nematodes, rotifers, and by certain desert mosses and lichens. In the Sahara, that means there are entire stretches of apparently sterile ground that are full of paused life, waiting for a rain that might take 5, 10, 20 years to arrive. And when it does, that ground turns green within days. Not because anything migrated there, but because what was already there simply started working again. The plants here play the same game with different equipment. The acacias that dot the wadis, the dry riverbeds that carry water perhaps once a decade, invest almost everything they have downward. Root systems on desert acacias have been documented reaching depths of over 30 meters, chasing water tables that no surface observation would reveal. The tree you see above ground is the smaller half of the organism. Others took the tardigrade approach. The resurrection plants of the arid world can lose the overwhelming majority of their cellular water and curl into what looks unmistakably like a dead brown husk. They can stay that way for years. Add water, and over the course of a day, the tissue rehydrates, the leaves unfold, chlorophyll reactivates, and photosynthesis resumes. Nothing was regrown. It was reconstituted. And then there is the strategy of pure speed. Across much of the Sahara, seeds lie dormant in the soil for years, chemically inhibited from germinating until a rainfall of sufficient volume washes the inhibitor away. That threshold matters. It means a light shower cannot trick them into committing. When a real rain comes, the response is explosive. Within days, the gravel plains produce a flush of green and flowers. Plants complete an entire life cycle, germinate, grow, flower, set seed, in a matter of weeks, and then die back completely, leaving a new generation of seeds in the soil to wait for the next one. A person could live in the same valley for 15 years and see it happen twice. And the ants, the beetles and the lizards that feed on all of this bring us back to the surface, and to the hunters waiting for them. The solifuge is a different thing entirely, and it is probably the most misunderstood animal in the desert. It is called a camel spider, or a wind scorpion, but it is neither spider nor scorpion. It is its own order of arachnid. It has no venom. It has no sting. What it has are chelicerae, its mouth parts, which relative to body size are among the largest and most powerful in the entire animal kingdom. 2 vertical pincers that operate independently and grind prey apart rather than piercing it. The solifuge is fast. It runs at over 10 kilometers per hour, which in an animal a few centimeters long is a violent speed. It hunts insects, spiders, scorpions, and small lizards. And it carries an unfair reputation built on one badly misread behavior. In full daylight, it chases shadows. Not because it is aggressive, but because it is desperate for shade. If you're standing in the desert and a solifuge runs toward you, it is heading for the shadow you cast, not for you. If you move, it moves too. And that is where the legend of the creature that chases people comes from. It is not hunting you. It is trying not to die of heat. The horned viper solves the heat and the hiding at the same time, and it does it without moving at all. Cerastes cerastes is a snake under a meter long with a pair of scales modified into horns above its eyes, which probably protect the cornea from wind-blown sand, though entire populations of the same species exist without them. It is the exact color of whatever substrate it lives on. Beige in pale sand, grayish in dark gravel. To conceal itself, it performs a movement called rocking burial. It flattens its body, rocks side to side, and sinks into the sand as though dissolving into it, until only the eyes and nostrils remain above the surface. And there it stays, hours, days if necessary, spending no energy, losing no water to evaporation, waiting for a rodent or a lizard to pass within striking range. And when it needs to move across loose sand, it uses sidewinding. Instead of sliding, it throws segments of its body laterally and touches the ground at only 2 points at a time. This solves two problems simultaneously: traction on a surface that gives way, and minimum contact with sand that is hot enough to burn tissue. At the other end of the food chain, there is a lizard that decided not to hunt anything at all. Uromastix, the spiny-tailed lizard, is one of the few essentially herbivorous reptiles in the Sahara. It eats leaves, seeds, and flowers from desert plants. It lives in burrows dug into compacted ground, with tunnels that can exceed 3 meters and descend to a depth where temperature stays reasonably stable across the whole day. Its tail is covered in rings of spiny scales and functions as a door. When a predator approaches, the Uromastix enters headfirst and inflates its body to lock against the tunnel walls, leaving the armored tail pointed at the entrance. A fox or a monitor lizard trying to pull it out finds a block of muscle wedged into a tight tunnel with spikes facing outward, and it barely drinks. It extracts the water it needs from the plants it eats and excretes excess salt through specialized nasal glands, a solution that appears repeatedly in desert and marine animals and that allows salt to be eliminated without spending water in the process. Now I am going to stop for a second, because there is something in this desert that changes the meaning of everything we have seen so far. There is an animal living in the middle of the Sahara that should not be able to be there. It is not an insect. It is not a microorganism hiding under a stone. It is a cold-blooded predator several meters long that needs water to live, and it is more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest river. It got trapped when the water dried up thousands of years ago, and it simply never left. If you are enjoying this journey through the Sahara almost nobody knows about, do me one favor. Subscribe to Doc Wild 4K right now. We publish wildlife documentaries every week, and by subscribing and turning on the bell, you get every new journey before most people do, without missing any of the territories we still have left to explore. It is free, and it is the best way to come with us. Subscribe and let's keep going, because here is the most improbable part of this story. In the Eneti Mountains of northeastern Chad, there is a canyon so narrow and so deep that sunlight reaches the floor for only a few hours a day. At the bottom of it lies a permanent pool of dark water, fed by seepage through the rock and by rain that falls rarely on the plateau above. This kind of formation is called a guelta, and inside that particular guelta live crocodiles. They are West African crocodiles, a species closely related to the Nile crocodile but genetically distinct, and the population surviving there is a relic, a biological remainder. When the Sahara was green, these crocodiles occupied a continuous network of rivers and lakes across the entire region. When the water retreated, most of the population died or was pushed south, but some groups were left isolated in these mountain pools, and they simply continued, generation after generation, for thousands of years, with no contact whatsoever with other populations of their species. Similar populations exist at other points in the desert, notably in the gueltas of Mauritania, where the species survives in even tighter conditions, and the way they do it is the most remarkable part. When the pool shrinks too far or dries out completely in the harshest season, these crocodiles withdraw into caves and burrows dug into the surrounding rock and mud. In the dark and the cool, they enter estivation, the heat equivalent of hibernation. Metabolism collapses. They stop feeding. They stop. They remain almost motionless for weeks or months, waiting for the water to come back. Individuals in these isolated populations tend to be smaller than river crocodiles of the same species, Chronic limitation of food and space across generations produced more compact animals. They eat what the Delta provides: small fish, frogs, birds that come down to drink, and whatever the camels and goats of nomadic herders bring nearby. And there is a human detail in this story worth recording. For a long time, Western biologists believed the crocodiles of the Sahara were extinct. The nomadic peoples of the region knew they were not. They lived alongside these animals, knew exactly which gueltas held them, and in several communities, those crocodiles are treated with respect and are not hunted. The knowledge was there the entire time. It just had not been published. Coming back up to the surface in the heat, let's get to the mammals, which in the Sahara are few, scattered, and each one a different engineering solution to the same problem. The fennec fox is the smallest canid in the world. It weighs between 1 and 1.5 kilograms, less than a small house cat, and has the largest ears of any member of the dog family relative to body size. Each ear can exceed 15 centimeters on an animal 35 centimeters long. Those ears do two things. First, they dissipate heat. They are thin, densely vascularized, and function as radiators, releasing body heat into the air. Second, they listen. The fennec detects the movement of insects and rodents beneath the sand with enough precision to locate and dig them out without ever seeing them. Its feet are covered in fur all the way to the soles, giving insulation against hot sand and traction on loose surfaces. Its coat is pale on top, reflecting solar radiation, and paler still underneath, reflecting the heat radiating off the ground. And it can survive without drinking liquid water, extracting moisture from prey and plants, with kidneys adapted to concentrate urine to extreme levels. During the day, it stays in burrows that can reach 10 meters in length, with multiple chambers and several exits dug into ground firm enough not to collapse. Fennecs are social. Several individuals share burrow systems, which is unusual among foxes and probably reflects the enormous cost of digging in an environment where that is the only way to survive midday. The addax is a darker story. It is a large antelope, almost white in summer and darker in winter, with spiral horns that can exceed 80 centimeters. It is possibly the large mammal best adapted to absolute desert on the planet. It does not need to drink, ever. It extracts all the water it needs from the plants it eats, including dry grasses and shrubs almost no other herbivore can process. Its hooves are broad and flattened, distributing weight on loose sand. Its pale coat reflects radiation. It can let its own body temperature rise several degrees over the course of a day without damage, which reduces the need to sweat. The same strategy the camel uses. The addax once ranged across the entire Sahara in herds of hundreds, following rainfall patterns over enormous distances. Today, it is critically endangered. Estimates of the wild population are in the low dozens of individuals. It was not the climate that did that. It was motorized hunting. An animal that evolved to survive the most hostile place on Earth has no defense whatsoever against a vehicle crossing an open plain at speed. The scimitar-horned oryx, a close relative, was declared extinct in the wild around the year 2000, surviving only in captivity. Starting in 2016, a reintroduction program began releasing captive-bred animals in Chad. The wild population began growing again, and the species was reclassified to a less severe threat category. It is one of the few documented cases of a large mammal going from extinct in the wild back to a breeding population in freedom. And there is a large predator in the Sahara that almost nobody knows exists. The Saharan cheetah is a subspecies of cheetah, and there are probably fewer than 250 adults left across its entire range, spread across Algeria, Niger, Mali, and Chad, at a density so low that a single animal may have a home range of thousands of square kilometers. It is different from the cheetah of the East African savanna. The coat is far paler, almost white on parts of the body with less dense spotting. The build is lighter, and the behavior is essentially inverted. While savanna cheetahs hunt predominantly by day, the Saharan cheetah is largely nocturnal and crepuscular. Because hunting under direct sun at 50 degrees is physically impossible for an animal already operating at its thermal limit during a high-speed pursuit. It hunts Dorcas gazelles and other small antelope, and like the addax, it gets most of the water it needs from the blood and tissue of its prey. A Saharan cheetah can go days without drinking. Finding one is so difficult that much of what is known about it comes from camera traps left in strategic locations for months. Researchers spend entire seasons in the desert without a single direct sighting. Among the birds, there is one that solved the water problem in a way no mammal managed. The sand grouse lives in arid areas and needs to drink daily, but its chicks hatch in nests on open ground, kilometers from the nearest water, and cannot fly there. The solution is in the male's feathers. The feathers on his belly have a specialized microstructure that functions as a sponge. The male flies to a water source, wades in and rocks his body, soaking those feathers until they hold a significant quantity of liquid. Then he flies back, distances that can exceed 20 or 30 kilometers, carrying water trapped against his own chest. At the nest, the chicks drink directly from the feathers. He does this every day for as long as the chicks depend on him, and he loses part of the load to evaporation on the way, which means the hotter the day, the less water arrives. There is also the pharaoh eagle owl here, a large pale owl that hunts rodents and reptiles in the dark with plumage the color of rock and orange eyes. It nests in cliff fissures and is one of the few predators able to operate during the Saharan night cold, when reptiles have already slowed too much to escape and small mammals are at peak activity. Beneath all of this, with nothing on the surface to indicate it, there is water. Under the eastern Sahara lies the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer System, one of the largest fossil freshwater reservoirs on the planet, extending across Egypt, Libya, Sudan, and Chad. The water stored there was deposited largely during the humid periods when rain fell on this region. It has been there for thousands of years and is not being meaningfully replenished because the rain that fed it no longer falls. It is water from the green Sahara. It is the same water that filled the lakes in the rock paintings, held in porous sandstone hundreds of meters down. Where that water table comes near the surface, or where geological faults push it upward, oases form. And an oasis is not the romantic scene from the illustrations. It is a dense, fiercely contested biological system, an island of productivity in an ocean of nothing, where everything living within tens of kilometers eventually converges. Date palms, grasses, insects, migratory birds using these points as stopovers on trans-Saharan crossings, mammals, reptiles, and the human communities that have depended on them for millennia. Modern extraction of that fossil water for large-scale irrigation and urban supply is happening at a rate many orders of magnitude faster than any natural recharge. It is mining, not renewable use, and it is one of the most serious and least discussed environmental issues in North Africa. Now it is time to close what I promised at the start. There is an ant nest in the middle of the Sahara. Around midday at the most brutal hour of the day, the surface around the entrance is above 60 degrees Celsius. Not a single animal is moving for kilometers. The lizards are buried. The scorpions are in burrows. The birds are motionless in shade. Everything with the capacity to escape the heat has already escaped it. And that is precisely the moment the Saharan silver ant comes out. Cataglyphis bombycina spends the entire morning inside the nest, with workers stationed at the exit, monitoring the external temperature, and they wait. They wait for the peak. They wait for the moment when surface heat passes the physiological limit of the lizards that hunt them, because those predators, desert animals though they are, have to withdraw above a certain temperature. At that instant, the entire colony explodes out of the ground. The window is a few minutes, 10, 15, depending on the day. In that interval, they run across the sand looking for what the heat itself has killed. insects, and small arthropods that could not take midday and died on the surface. They collect those bodies and run back to the nest. And when the window closes, all of them disappear again at the same time. They feed almost exclusively on what the desert executed for them. To do this, that ant holds the heat tolerance record for the entire animal kingdom. It withstands body temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius, a value that denatures proteins in most organisms. It produces heat shock proteins before leaving the nest, preparing its cells for what is coming. It runs at a speed that, relative to body length, is among the highest ever measured in any land animal, which reduces exposure time and keeps its body further from the layer of air immediately above the sand, which is the hottest of all. And it raises its abdomen while running, minimizing contact and proximity with the surface. And then comes the detail that gives it its name. The ant's body is covered in densely packed hairs with a triangular cross-section. That geometry does two things at once. It reflects solar and near-infrared radiation, reducing heat gain, and it simultaneously increases heat emission in the mid-infrared, helping the body radiate energy away. Reflect what comes in. Expel what is held. It is a passive cooling system made of hair, and engineers study that structure to develop materials that cool without consuming energy. And the hardest part is still to come: getting back. With a window of minutes and no reliable visual reference on a uniform plane, missing the way home is certain death. So the ant does not search for the nest, it knows where it is. Ants of this genus navigate by path integration. They track direction using the polarized light pattern of the sky, which functions as a compass, even with the sun directly overhead. And they track distance by counting their own steps. Classic experiments demonstrated this directly. Researchers artificially lengthened the legs of ants returning to the nest, and those ants overshot. They shortened the legs of others, and those stopped short. The error was proportional to the change in stride length. They are literally counting. So at the hottest point of the day, in the hottest desert in the world, an animal a few millimeters long comes out of the ground, runs across a surface that would kill almost any other creature on contact, collects the bodies of those that did not survive, calculates a return vector by integrating solar angle and number of steps, and gets home before its own physiology collapses. Every day, in silence, without anyone watching. That is what I promised at the beginning. That is the toughest thing alive on Earth. And this is where the Sahara finally makes sense. We were taught to see the desert as absence, as the place where life failed, where the green gave out, where nothing was left but sand and emptiness. That is why the word desert became a synonym for dead in our own language. But you have just crossed 9 million square kilometers and seen bacteria living inside stones, animals that paused their own existence for decades, a crocodile that got trapped 10,000 years ago and simply continued, an antelope that never drinks, a fox that hears through sand, a bird that carries water in its chest for 30 kilometers, and an ant that comes out precisely when everything else has to hide. The desert is not the opposite of life. It is life without excess. There is no room here for anything unnecessary. Every structure, every behavior, every minute of activity has to pay for itself in water and in heat, and whatever did not pay was eliminated thousands of years ago. What you saw today is the result of a merciless edit. What remained after the green Sahara dried out and asked every living thing the same question: can you keep going with almost nothing? These could, and those people painted swimming on a cave wall in the middle of absolute nowhere were not dreaming. They were right. The water was there. And on a timescale where the Earth's axis tilts back again, it will be there once more. Climate models indicate the Sahara's humid cycle is recurrent across tens of thousands of years. The desert is a phase. What lives here is waiting it out. Tell me in the comments which of these surprised you most. The crocodile trapped in the middle of the desert, the microscopic animal that switches off for decades and comes back, or the ant that only comes out during the 10 deadliest minutes of the day. Leave a like if you enjoyed this journey, subscribe if you have not already, and share this video with someone who thinks the Sahara is just empty sand. Until the next one, go somewhere wild. Doc Wild 4K